Wholesale Market update. I'm just going to give it a few seconds to make sure the stream is up and running before we kick it off. All right, looks like we've got a little audience joining us, so we're ready to get going. Welcome to the 2021 Cannabis Wholesale Market Update. I'm Chris Lenz, your host from GreenGrowth CPAs, and we will be joined, as always, by our friends at Cannabis Benchmarks. So let's please welcome the, as always, magnificently mustachioed Adam Koh from Cannabis Benchmarks. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
Great.
Good to be here.
Yep. So before we get started, maybe just give everyone a quick, if they haven't seen our little show before, sort of a quick background of who you are and where all this info is coming from.
Sure. So Cannabis Benchmarks is an independent, unbiased price reporting agency for legal cannabis markets. We've been collecting wholesale transaction data from legal cannabis operators, what we call our price contributor network, since April 2015 was when we first launched and published our first price assessments. We've been doing that weekly, publishing wholesale flower prices. We now cover 18 different state markets, as well as the US as a whole. And we're working on expanding to cover more states, more countries as legalization progresses.
Great. Yeah, and GreenGrowth CPAs, as you probably know, is a cannabis-focused accounting and advisory firm. And in helping our clients optimize their finances, improve sales processes, do price risk management, all of these things, we lean on the analysis and data that we get from Cannabis Benchmarks, and it's been super helpful. And so we're providing this show free to everyone to get an inside look at kind of analysis that's going to be helpful. So let's just jump right in here. Where are we with wholesale prices? We've had some bad news to deliver the last couple of months. Looks like prices are still trending the wrong direction, right?
Yeah, it is, unfortunately, it's that time of year. And so right now, for November, just to summarize the last month, the US spot index, so the aggregate price for all the markets we cover, all the grow types as a whole, that averaged $1,328 per pound, $1,328 per pound in November. That was down over 6% from October. And if you watched our interview last month, October was a 4% decline from September. So that downtrend that we've been following actually accelerated in November. And also, we actually have seen some milestones, just like we did in October. Looking at weekly prices, the US spot fell below $1,300 per pound in the final week of November, which is the first time we've seen it hit that low level since July 2019. And November's average price, November 2021's average price, was down 18%, or almost $300 per pound compared to the year before in November 2020. So a big decline in just a year. Very different story this year.
Man, that's tough. And those outside the industry think of cannabis, oh, it's this emerging market, billions of dollars in revenue. But those of us on the ground doing the work see the struggles are very, very real. Tell us what's pushing this decline in wholesale prices?
Well, there's a few things going on. First of all, the main thing is the autumn outdoor harvest on the West Coast, and also, Colorado has a decent sized outdoor harvest as well. That's continued to pull down spot prices for flower in those states. And that's really the main driver of national prices as well. Anyone that's familiar with the seasonality of the wholesale cannabis market, that'll come as no surprise to them. There's just a massive, massive amount of supply produced in those Western states. So it's hard for price not to react. And on top of that, this year's outdoor harvest is compounding an oversupply that was produced in 2020 and earlier in the summer of 2021 as well. But then even in, those are the sort of more mature states that have been legalized for a little while. But even in newer states, and we can talk in more detail later, but Michigan is a state that also has outdoor growing. The adult use market there only opened at the very end of 2019. So this is really the first year we're seeing a sizable seasonal production shift in Michigan. We're seeing some downtrend in wholesale prices there. And then even in some of the most expensive wholesale markets in the country, speaking specifically of Illinois and Massachusetts, we're starting to see some declines in those markets as well.
Wow. So we'll dig into those more specifically as we move across, but we're going to go left to right here, West Coast to East Coast, mature markets into some of the newer markets, and start digging in. Now, we have a lot of operators that we're working with in California. The decline in wholesale prices is absolutely killing cultivators right now. What's going on?
Yeah, anyone that's following the industry, our interviews, our Cannabis Benchmarks in general, you'll know that California, that was the first state to sort of initiate this larger national downtrend earlier this year. It actually began in June in California. We started to see wholesale prices fall. And just to give an idea of the scope, from the 6 months, from the first week of June to the first week of December, California's spot index, so all grow types, that's fallen by 34% in 6 months, or over $500. So it's lost over a third of its value, really massive decline. And then another notable thing is in late November, we actually saw California's spot index fall below $1,000 per pound for the first time ever. So again, we've been following this going back to 2015. The previous all-time low in California was about $10.50 per pound back in October 2018, 3 years ago. So, at the moment, we're literally in uncharted territory in California's legal market. Prices have never been this low.
Wow. Seasonality plays a lot into it, as we've discussed, but also with the growth of the legal market. What's the story? Just that many cultivators coming online, simple supply and demand situation, supply vastly outdoing demand at this point.
Yeah, there's a few big picture issues, and we've talked about these in previous interviews. One is to start on the demand side, the retail footprint in California is still quite limited, with a lot of municipalities banning retailers. So wholesale product needs somewhere to go, right? So that if there's more storefronts, it can absorb the supply and serve customers through the licensed system. That's not quite happening yet. And then, like you mentioned, a lot of people entering. California's regulations are some of the most stringent in the country in terms of getting in and getting that license. And for growers, in certain areas, you have to meet environmental requirements as well. So even though the legal market opened back in 2018, and I'm sure GreenGrowth CPAs is familiar with this in your work, but we've talked to growers who spend months, even 18 months up to 2 years going through the licensing process. So that is part of it. That sort of came to a head this year. We saw more people being licensed late in 2020, early 2021. And that's led to expanded production this year as retail store expansion has sort of slowed down for the moment.
Wow. Yeah. So there's been a lot of hemming and hawing and rightfully being upset about the delays in the licensing process, but it turns out that that was almost artificially supporting the market, and that it was keeping this sort
Mhm.
of deluge of oversaturation happening. So it's a very interesting point. And of course, in our work, we're helping with the tax aspect of it. And I'd say maybe a silver lining to kind of what we're seeing is we're seeing major pushback from cannabis operators, especially cultivators, regarding the taxes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, obviously legal cannabis is still relatively new. Every state has taken different approaches to taxation, which, you're familiar with at GreenGrowth. I know you help people sort through all those very complicated issues. But California is pretty unique in that it's one of the most heavily taxed states. And anyone following the industry news has probably heard that some growers in California, distributors, people in the licensed market that are taking a beating right now with the falling prices. They've actually, they're talking about the possibility of a tax strike, somewhat akin to the Boston Tea Party. So, the original, I guess, American dream, right? Not paying your taxes. But yeah, it's a rightly frustrating situation. Unfortunately, right now, the state law requires the California Tax Department to adjust the cultivation tax for inflation. Inflation's up, so the cultivation tax went up. Starting 2022, the tax on flower, California taxes, the cultivation tax hits three categories of products: flower, leaves, which is basically trim, other plant material for extraction, and then the fresh plants that also get extracted. But the cultivation tax on flower starting next year is going to go up to $161 and change per pound. And that's a flat tax by weight in California. They're, along with Alaska, they're the only states that have this flat rate tax. So the grower is paying that no matter what price they're getting. So you can see obviously how falling prices and flat taxes can really be a punch in the gut for businesses. If you're looking at California's spot price overall right now, the $161 cultivation tax on flower would equate to about a 16% tax rate. That's generally in line with states like Colorado and Nevada. They tax cultivators at 15%. But if you're an outdoor producer, if you're growing outdoors in California, it's a really different story. Not only is the cultivation tax flat by weight, no matter what the price, it's also, no matter what grow type, what license type you have. So for outdoor products specifically in California, we've seen the volume weighted, excuse me, we've seen the volume weighted average for that drop below $600 per pound early this month. So, again, looking at that $161 per pound tax rate, that's almost a 30% cultivation tax on outdoor growers. And that, I should note that 600 per pound figure is an average. We've seen individual transactions for outdoor flower for significantly lower prices, $300 per pound, $200 per pound, things like that. So, those growers are getting hit very, very hard by both the falling prices and the taxes. It's understandable that they're frustrated. And yeah, it's hard not to have sympathy for these entrepreneurs, these small business owners that really jumped in trying to make a go of it, for their employees, for their families, and yeah, it's really just the market forces and the regulations are sort of combining to make it really tough right now. And just to close out this discussion, we mentioned the cultivation tax applies to leaves or trim as well. And so the product that's getting sent away to processors for extraction and product manufacturing, we actually at Cannabis Benchmarks, we track prices for trim in California. and we've seen them fall this year from about $100 per pound earlier in the spring, summer, down to around $50 per pound in November. And so, on top of that huge drop, the cultivation tax on trim is going to be $48 per pound starting next year. So, I mean, if these prices hold, which we expect that they will, that's pretty much 100% tax rate, which is just, it's really wild. And I don't know, I think if any business was going to be taxed at 100% rate, it doesn't really make sense to be in business now, does it?
No, it's absolutely not. Yeah, we're seeing sort of a perfect storm of, like you said, these regulatory and market conditions coming together to essentially crush this fledgling, legal market that we have. And it's already been such an uphill battle to bring in legacy operators into the market, to motivate folks to do this in a compliant and legal fashion. And you're going to raise the taxes when you already can't make a profit. It's just nonsensical. But I can report here in California, there is a groundswell of not quite optimism, but there is movement, like you're saying, towards this sort of tax pushback. And if they hadn't done the tax raise, there might have been a little more just, grin and bear it kind of attitude, but there's some serious pushback. And so we're hoping this will work its way up into the legislation, and then we'll get some action here pretty quickly. And we've gotten a little bit of traction as far as the taxes go. There's been quite a bit of fanfare around San Francisco delaying their tax.
Right.
But even that, it was a tax that hadn't been implemented yet. That was going to be an additional local tax on top of everything. So it's like, well, that's great. It still hasn't really improved anything. All you've done is delayed it from getting significantly worse.
Yeah.
As if that wasn't enough, Tucky Blunt's got a great comment in our chat here about the robberies. So I'm sure you've been hearing about that out in Colorado and beyond, but there's been a rash of very bold, very bad robberies of dispensaries and even some cultivators. That's sort of just happening all over. And we really point to the fact that banking issues, and that everyone knows that dispensaries have a ton of cash on hand, which makes them very likely targets. And we're seeing it's more than just supporting the industry. It's a public health issue and a public safety issue. And as if that's not bad enough, we got the Safe Banking Act dropped from legislation just last week, and there's no help on the way. So it's pretty tough.
Yeah. We had been focusing on the state level taxes, but you brought up a great point. Number of points. That it's not only that, it's the local taxes layered on, and then despite being federally illegal, we're still paying federal taxes as well. And as you guys know at GreenGrowth, very, very steep, heavy federal taxes because of 280E. And unfortunately, like you said, it doesn't seem like it's going to get fixed anytime soon. So, we'll see what happens. The industry is, very, persevered through tough times before, and hopefully can do so again as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And just a quick shout out to what we've been doing. We've been publishing a lot of content, especially around navigating taxes for cannabis cultivators and dispensaries. And 280E is really difficult, but with some tax planning and implementing 471 and these other kind of strategies, you can effectively lower your sort of tax burden. So there are ways to do it. We provide a lot of free info about how to do it, but if you want to work with some experts, give us a call, that kind of thing. So let's move on to another state that we'll get to some good news hopefully by the end here, but let's take a look at Oregon. Again, another on the mature market, and that's also been struggling. So what's going on in Oregon?
Yeah, so Oregon sort of followed California. We've seen wholesale prices in that state start to decline in July. That continued into November. Oregon's spot index actually fell below 1,100 per pound, so it's a little higher than California's right now, but it still is in a downtrend. Not a huge surprise in the aftermath of the harvest again. We actually spoke to a grower in southwestern Oregon for one of our recent reports. And for those who might not be familiar, that's sort of the breadbasket there of where most of the outdoor cannabis is grown in Jackson and Josephine County in Oregon. And this person has been in the industry for a long time. He described this year's crop as a bumper crop. So if someone that's been around as long as he has and seen what he has says it's big, it's a big harvest. And so there's probably going to be a lot of supply out there available in Oregon, likely deep into 2022 from this year's crop.
Oh, geez. Yeah, quick, want to insert a quick response here to a comment from Derek Enright. We did just see that Visa memo about cashless ATMs breaking regulations. Again, bad news, but not really a big surprise. The big financial institutions have not made any kind of movement toward accepting or allowing cannabis. Just more of bad news. So not much to add there other than, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it really changes too much on the ground. Anyone that shops at legal retailers is probably familiar with, sort of the carousel. Sometimes you can use your debit card. Sometimes the payment processing gets shut down. You have to use cash. Back and forth. It'll probably be pretty similar, going forward with this memo.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Not much change, but just an unfortunate vote of non-confidence from extremely powerful and influential financial institutions. So not surprising, but yeah, very unfortunate. So let's shift. One of the few bright spots we've had when we started this, I think in October was our first one, and we've been really focusing on bad news. So hopefully we'll keep doing these, and as a market turns around, we'll have some better news to share. One of the few bright spots has been the newer markets in the Midwest and on the East Coast, but fortunately we are seeing some downtrends there as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've been talking outdoor harvests. In the newer markets, Michigan is really the only state right now that has that significant outdoor production. And we've been tracking state data in Michigan month to month. And this year is really the first year we've seen big seasonal increases in plant counts. This summer, we started to see more plants being cultivated and into the fall. And then, of course, in the October, November timeframe, that dropped off with the harvest. And we did not see that last year in Michigan. I think growers were still getting up and running. So we'll have to see how things have played out. Prices have stayed pretty steady so far in Michigan, though. They have been around $2,300 per pound, significantly higher than the West Coast. But that is still down from about $2,800 per pound around the beginning of this year. So, it's again, not a big surprise. Michigan's market has unlimited licenses. They've issued, close to, or maybe they might have even topped 1,000 cultivation licenses at this point. And plus with the outdoor, you're going to see a downtrend in price, but it's holding up, and it's not at sort of catastrophic levels like we're seeing in some of the West Coast states, thankfully. But yeah, we'll have to see how this harvest plays out. Like I said, it's the first time we've really seen that sizable outdoor production. We didn't see the big swell in plant counts last year. So yeah, I think for the people in the market, it's going to be new how they deal with that as well. So we'll have to see where things go.
Yeah, it seems like they're likely to fall into the pattern that we've been seeing, which is playing out across the country at this point. As the more mature markets, they get more and more, they get up and running. There tends to be this sort of deluge once all the operators get up. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's unfortunately pretty likely that we'll see definitely the seasonal dips with Michigan's outdoor grow and harvest. And we'll see probably that impact is likely to continue expanding. Now, two of the bright spots we've talked about recently have been Illinois and Massachusetts, who had last month, we said, had the highest wholesale spot index prices. So what's happening in those states?
Yeah, they're still quite expensive there. Like we mentioned at the outset, we have seen prices come down a little bit. There's no outdoor growing in Illinois. Massachusetts, there's only a handful of cultivators licensed to grow outdoors, so it's not a big impact on the market the way it is in other states. But one commonality between those two is, both had really seen rapid sales growth, rapid demand growth starting from last year in the summer up through this summer as well. But since then, it's sort of leveled off and started to decline a little bit. In Illinois, November adult use sales came in at around 120 million, and that's down from the peak of 128 million that we saw in July. Massachusetts has seen an even bigger softening of demand. They were up around that same sales level in the summer, around the $125 million monthly mark. And November's adult use sales in Massachusetts came in at just about $110 million. So a pretty big dip right there. And on top of that, in Massachusetts, that's another state where the licensing process is pretty lengthy. But we have seen sort of an uptick in cultivators entering the market. So from this summer, around August, we counted about 50 growers with permission from the state to actually operate. And that increased to 66 as of early December. So that's a 30% increase in growers who are allowed to actually, be putting out supply and selling in the wholesale market. So that should continue to, put downward pressure on wholesale prices as those new entrants ramp up their operations. But like I said, yeah, price is still very high, slightly down though. In November in Massachusetts, the state spot index was about 35.50 per pound, down about $50 from October. And Illinois' state spot in November averaged just over $4,000 a pound, which highest in the country still, as it has been for quite a while. But that was actually down over $100 from October. So it does seem like the production is catching up a little bit as the demand has sort of leveled off.
Yeah. Well, one state I want to make sure we address, thanks to another comment in the chat here. Can we take a quick look at Oklahoma and sort of, we've had some dire news from Oklahoma in previous months. So where are we trending over there?
Yeah, so Oklahoma has been, it seems to have found sort of a level. We saw, just like almost every state last year, there was sort of a roller coaster with demand booming. And in Oklahoma, as we've talked about, the licensing scheme is very light touch there, light regulations, low fees, low barriers to entry. So, you had a lot of growers entering the market, big up and down swings in price, but it has been more level lately, sort of around the 1650 to 1750 per pound mark. We're still seeing the fluctuations in licenses and things like that, but it seems like there has been some equilibrium. The sales have stayed pretty steady at around 70 to 80 million monthly since mid last year. So again, a market that definitely was a wild ride. Still has the potential to be, but for the moment, it seems to have found a steadiness that others have not.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It's one of our markets we do the most work in, that we know really intimately. And yeah, I think the Wild West days, I think we've all seen, are coming to an end. There will be, nothing for sure yet, but we expect a lot more regulations to start coming in, some licensing caps, higher thresholds, and that kind of thing, which, especially for folks who are already in Oklahoma, that's good news. Stay compliant, stick through. Things are going to get better, we think.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think they're still in court over the implementing the metric, the track and trace system. So, the increased regulations it'll probably support higher wholesale prices in the near term, as businesses have to, spend more money to comply. But, once they become accustomed to it, it'll level off again, I think, and start to go down.
Great. So let's start talking a little bit about what's coming up next. Anything that your team is keeping your eyes on?
Yeah, lots of stuff. I mean, never a dull moment these days, it seems like. Um, but to start on the demand side of the market, we talked last month about looking at legal cannabis sales in terms of broader economic trends. We have inflation right now, increasing consumer prices for essential goods, gas, utilities, food. And I think it was last month that the Fed chairman, finally he said the administration had been saying inflation is going to be transitory, it'll go away, but they finally sort of admitted that it won't be. So it seems like those elevated prices are going to stick around to some extent for a while. And, we'll have to see how that impacts legal cannabis sales trends. Prior to COVID, we had found a pretty predictable month to month pattern in sales. And I'm sure, you and others who have followed the market could see that as well. But last year we started to see some departures from those trends, and we'll have to see how things play out in the future. So, it's definitely something to watch in terms of if those trends do change markedly. Wholesale market participants will have to adjust. People doing intake for retailers will have to look at how maybe they have to adjust their strategies and their inventory management and things like that. So that's something to watch. Also on the retail side, with these wholesale prices falling, you'd sort of expect retail prices to follow. That might seem like a negative. I mean, it's a positive for consumers. It might seem like a negative for businesses in the short term. But what we've seen is when retail prices come down, it helps to pull consumers into the legal market. So people that might have been buying from an illegal source because it's cheaper, if the legal prices are competitive and you can get a tested product that's clean and that's not grown in sort of criminal circumstances, people will generally prefer that if the price is competitive enough. So in the long run, if the retail prices can follow wholesale prices down a little bit, that could be the start of a turnaround by just bringing more consumers into the market, more demand. However, one thing we've heard over the years that growers have told us is often retailers will keep their prices stable even as wholesale prices fall. So understandable, but again, maybe thinking longer term, it might be more advantageous to give the consumers a little break when you have the room and your margins. Looking on the production side, for growers, unfortunately, in some of these states that are really hard hit with low wholesale prices, it's very likely we'll see growers exit the market. It's an unfortunate reality in new industries. There's often these boom bust cycles as the supply and the demand is being sort of felt out and gauged. So growers exit, in the long run, that'll support higher prices by taking supply out of the market. But in the short term, unfortunately, there's already a ton of supply out there. And even when businesses do leave, they'll often liquidate their remaining inventory. And if you're exiting, you don't have a lot of bargaining power. So that inventory often gets let go for pretty low prices. So in the near term, growers exiting can actually pull wholesale prices down. And that's something we saw in Oregon years back when prices were historically low there. And the last thing, again, unfortunate, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but with the inflation, growers' costs are rising. So, we've talked a lot about outdoor, but with higher energy costs, higher utility costs, that's going to hit indoor growers very hard. And anyone, following economic news in general knows that there's been upward pressure on wages this year. I was a former grower myself, so I'm familiar with the fact that utilities and labor are pretty much your biggest costs. So with wholesale prices falling, production costs rising, margins are getting squeezed on both sides. Growers are very innovative. I know, like I said, as a former one myself, we're always trying to find new ways to be more efficient. And, I think it'll be tough sledding for the industry into the next year, but I'm confident that operators will continue to innovate and find ways to, lower costs of production, put out good product, and hopefully we can pull through this rough patch here.
Yeah, absolutely. All great points. And we have similar advice that we give our clients. We're seeing a lot of distress in the marketplace. We're in there with the financials, looking very closely at those profit margins, operating costs, and everything. And yeah, it's really tough, but I really appreciate your sort of broad market perspective. It's really easy to get focused on the day to day when you're just trying to pay your bills and get everything done. But in the broader industry trends, that things are going to turn around, and there are opportunities for efficiencies at this point. Like you said, we did publish a piece of content a couple weeks, months, maybe last month, about strategies to survive downturns like right now. And one of the things that we did say was, especially for indoor growers, if the wholesale market price has plunged that much where you're really not turning a profit, it might be worth skipping a flower or two to reduce those utility costs. And those, if you're not going to turn a profit on that flower, it might feel counterproductive sometimes to not be maximizing production, which you've probably been focused on your entire growing career. But yeah, until things turn around, it might be worth to slow down a little bit, put that energy into R&D, and really work on your strains and improving your product and so on. So before we drop off, we got another quick question. Can you give us a quick update on your home state there in Colorado? How are things looking?
Yeah, so Colorado has, if people want to click back to previous discussions that I think we talked about Colorado in detail last month. The prices there have been on a downtrend as well. Ended November and starting December, it's leveled off a little bit at around $1,100 per pound. So similar to some of the West Coast states, we did see a sizable oversupply generated in 2020. And like you said, it's hard for growers to pull back. I know the philosophy, especially back in the day when I was in the game, was, if you grow it, it'll sell. But that's, we've seen that's not the case anymore. So, we'll see what happens going forward. But it's fairly level right now, around 1,100. The outdoor harvest here in Colorado is not as sizable as on the West Coast. When we started here in Colorado, production was required to be indoors. So the footprint, the cultivation footprint, still much more indoor heavy. So that'll support a little higher wholesale prices. But yeah, I mean, it's lower than it's been, down about 35% from a year ago. And similar to some of the other states we mentioned, the sales have started to sort of trend downward after that big boom during the first COVID year in 2020. So, it has the potential to go lower, and we'll see how growers sort of manage their production and their inventory. There's plenty of supply out there, but yeah, it's not as dire as in California or Oregon with the huge outdoor harvests there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's a good time to remind folks that, you're not at mercy to the market. There are strategies that you can put into place to navigate these up and upturns and downturns and so on. And we started this partnership with a series we did on navigating wholesale price risk. So I'll put some links probably into the description here if you want to go back and look at the kinds of things you can be doing on a purchasing and selling perspective to help even these out and navigate it. And yeah, it's a great partnership with Cannabis Benchmarks just because we're both just putting a lot of free information out there, trying to help operators just implement better financial and operational practices so that you can build a better, stronger industry.
Yeah, agree. It's a great fit. And, we're working here. You mentioned the price risk management piece. That was just an introduction. We're working here on new types of analysis, digging into our historical data to find different levels and strategies that can sort of give market participants, an ability to, like you said, just not sort of be at the mercy of supply and demand. And yeah, we're excited to roll those out next year together, and hopefully we can give people more tools to stay afloat and thrive.
Yep, we're all in this together. So, All right, well, that's all we got. Thank you so much, as always, Adam, for joining us, providing the data. It's much appreciated, and thanks so much to our audience for chiming in, helping guide our discussion. We're happy to answer your questions. So we do this the second Tuesday of every month. So we'll get those links out so you can set your calendars, and we'll keep at it. Thank you again so much, Adam.
All right. Thanks, Chris. And happy holidays.
Thanks. You too.